We live in a world where the traumatic impact of racism is far too often ignored or minimized. But the wounds are real in our bodies, our families, and our stories. At the Allender Center, we believe that the healing of our wounds begins when we tell the truth, when we name our experiences, when we share our stories in community. Hi, I'm Linda Royster from the Allender Center, and I'm honored to invite you to our upcoming story workshop for racial trauma and healing. This is a profound event that invites you deeply into the themes of your life, particularly core things that are common to people within racially marginalized communities of color who have experienced personal and collective trauma. This story workshop is created for and led by Black, Indigenous, Latino, and Latina, and Asian Pacific Islander people as the global majority of the world's population. By centering the lived experiences of people of color, this story workshop can create a safer space for you as you seek to understand, write, tell, and live your story in deeper and more transformative ways. We're committed to making this offering financially accessible, thanks to the generosity of the Stewardship Foundation and our donor community. Need-based scholarships are available. If you or someone you know is interested in being a part of this powerful experience, we invite you to check out the upcoming dates and register at theallendercenter.org/workshops. Again, that's theallendercenter.org/workshops. We would be honored to hold space for your story this year.
Thank you for listening to the Allender Center podcast. I'm Dr. Dan Allender.
And I'm Rachael Clinton Chen. We're fiercely committed to providing hope and healing to a fragmented world.
And restoration for the heart.
Thank you for joining us. Let's get this conversation started. Good people with good bodies. As much as I long for the day when spiritual abuse, and really all forms of abuse, cease to exist, today is really not that day. Unfortunately, at every turn, it seems the abuse and misuse of power from those in spiritual authority has only intensified, or at the very least, the exposure and revelation of the abuse has intensified. And it doesn't help when those in our government at the highest seats of power perpetuate harm and claim to do so with God's permission and provision, which honestly is a tale as old as time. All that to say, if you are a victim and survivor of spiritual abuse, it's likely you find yourself incredibly activated these days. And I just want to name that you are worthy of safety, care, and healing. I think you know by now that we are committed to this work at the Allender Center, but it's really one of those realities we need all hands on deck. So I'm always encouraged and incredibly grateful for trustworthy partners in this work. And I'm very much looking forward to introducing you to one of those partners who is here with us today. Brian Lee is a pastor, coach, and speaker. He's also the founder of Broken to Beloved, a nonprofit that exists to help victims and survivors of spiritual abuse, religious trauma, and church harm to offer practical pathways towards healing and wholeness. They provide a lot of resources for recovery, as well as support pastors and leaders and those churches who are really wanting to build healthy, trauma-informed environments. As a survivor of spiritual abuse and religious trauma himself, this work is personal as much as it is vocational. And I'm just really looking forward to this conversation with you, Brian. So welcome.
It's an honor to be here. Thanks, Rachael.
Yeah. So from one survivor of spiritual abuse to another, I know that I'm assuming that you didn't when you were dreaming about calling and your vocation, you weren't like, someday I'm going to be someone who's committed to, healing and providing resources around spiritual abuse. So tell me a little bit about, some of your origins in getting into ministry and, how you found yourself here today.
Yeah. Isn't that what we all dream of as second graders and third graders? Is I want to talk about spiritual abuse. I didn't have the language of spiritual abuse till about 5 years ago.
Yeah.
And I had been experiencing it for over 15, maybe more prior to that. And until then, really, you just live your life thinking, am I crazy or what's wrong with me? Right. And I've grown up in church my entire life. I grew up in a large Korean church outside of New York City. My dad planted a church in Pittsburgh, a Korean and American church. I left there and went to Philly. And that's where I started working in churches. And it's funny because I saw the way that church life consumed my family growing up. It becomes everything, especially when your dad is the pastor. And so I kind of vowed to myself, as like, oh, well, I'm never going to do that. And joke's on me because I did. Like I went to go work for church. I got my credentials. I'm an ordained minister for over, I don't know how many years. I've worked in 4 or 5 different churches, I think now. And I've experienced 3 distinct instances of spiritual abuse and toxic leadership in 3 different environments, right? So like we said at the beginning, it was just like, man, what just happened? What's wrong with me that I was treated this way, or what did I not do right? Because you hear leaders speak with one kind of language, and then you see a completely different kind of behavior behind closed doors, and sometimes very much out in the open.
That's right.
That causes that cognitive dissonance of what in the world is going on, and my brain doesn't know how to reconcile this. And then it happened again at the next church where I landed. So that's where you think, oh, the problem must be me because it's still happening. And it happened again in a different way, but it sure feels very similar. And then I landed in a place where I could kind of catch my breath for a little bit. I actually felt like I was doing really well, maybe for the first time thriving in ministry. And then ended up down in Virginia where we are today with a place that offered the promise of healing. I was very upfront because I would walk into interviews and introduce myself and they would say, hey, why do you want to be here? And I would say, well, actually, you don't want me here because I'm damaged goods. I'm broken. You don't want me because of here are the experiences that have happened. And so they listened with what I thought was empathy and compassion and say, well, we would love for you to come and just heal and have a place to catch your breath, get your feet under you. And don't those sound like wonderful things? And then it ended up being the most toxic and abusive place I've ever worked.
Oh, no.
And very quickly, within 3 or 4 years, was gone. And, 2020 didn't help. COVID didn't help. Anti-Asian, all the Asian hate and stuff didn't help. And so the short answer to the long explanation is after lots and lots of counseling and therapy and reading and getting the language for spiritual abuse. As soon as I heard those words, I was like, oh my gosh, that's what happened to me. I had no idea. But now that there's a word for it, I need to learn everything I can. And the more I learned, the more I got language for validating the experience without excusing what happened to me, without excusing my part that I played. And it was my counselor who said, hey, you're a different man today than the one that walked into my office a year ago. Do you think this might be helpful to someone else? Because I was reading so much and getting all these resources. So started doing the work and offering, I was like, hey, would this be helpful to anyone else? And sure enough, it was. And people started showing up. And so now here I find myself doing this crazy thing that whoever could have imagined, right?
Well, I mean, it certainly speaks to your generativity and generosity. And I think it's true of most healers I know. It's like, in some ways, we know about healing out of necessity.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like a blessing out of our own poverty in some ways, like both out of our own poverty and our own riches. But not necessarily, what we signed up for. I can relate to that in the sense that, I mean, I was working in the Allender Center, tending to trauma and abuse, growing my trauma-informed capacity, could have said I experienced clergy abuse. I grew up in a kind of more fundamentalist environment that certainly had, like some not helpful things. I could talk about developmental trauma and different things, but I had not made the connection. This is actually like some of these things you've experienced it's a form of abuse. And I think for a lot of people, like you're naming your experience as kind of playing out primarily in a church setting, which I actually think it's harder for people in church leadership to see that what they're experiencing is spiritual abuse than like
Yeah.
let's say if you're in a little bit different position in the power dynamic. So it makes a lot of sense that you would have had a lot of confusion as to like what is happening and why does this keep happening. But I often say like spiritual abuse can feel almost like something if we don't have the language for it, if someone hasn't helped us make the connections, it can feel like water draining through a colander, like what is it? So I would love to hear from you as you have, found language from others, been given language from others, developed your own language. How would you help someone define or kind of paint a picture of like, what are we talking about when we talk about spiritual abuse?
Man, this is what I've spent like the last 5 years trying to read about and consolidate and synergize into something that makes sense. And everyone has a different definition, right? I love a short clip I saw from Janai Alman, probably on Instagram, and she just said, spiritual abuse is when you use God's words to dehumanize God's beloved.
Yeah.
And I think it's that. There's a power differential. So someone in power above you is using their influence, power, and control to make you feel like less than. And usually within a spiritual context. So whether they're weaponizing prayer or scripture or their quote spiritual authority, whatever it is in a way that makes you question your agency, your worth, your value, your belovedness, any of those things, when God or something spiritual is used against you. Instead of to enrich you or disciple you or point you towards Christ, it points you towards shame and wickedness and all of these other things. So I don't know. That's my best attempt right now.
Yeah, no, I like you. Like I've kind of pulled so many people's definitions, and I think very similarly, like that, just that sense of like when spiritual authority is being weaponized or utilized to control or harm or violate, and it can be so tricky because I think so many people think, well, spiritual abuse is clergy abuse. And it's like, well, it certainly is. But spiritual abuse, if we're talking about spiritual authority, could play out in a family system. It could play out in like a school system or any kind of community or relationship, really, where trust is like the trust that's being given because of the place of spiritual authority is being weaponized or being wielded in a way that, like you said, actually love that. That is like not leading you to a sense of being beloved, or coming against your identity as beloved. And it makes me think about how spiritual abuse can be like an umbrella for so many different forms of abuse, right? And that's, I think, also what makes it tricky is someone can say, well, yeah, I experienced, maybe some emotional abuse or some sexual abuse or physical abuse, but we don't always get to name like the spiritually abusive realities that are, playing out. And I think, it makes me think about what you said about the last community you were a part of, because I think this is a really important part for many of us and where we have the most shame is like when what's being offered is something we desperately need and like we're actually meant for. Like you are meant for healing and recovery and like honor and rest. And when that invitation gets like flipped in a way that it's like it happens, it's kind of like the frog in the boiling water, like in a way that like it takes you a while to catch up to like, wait a minute.
Hold on, what's happening here?
This is bad. This is really bad. But it can feel so like, why did I choose this? Why did I want this? Like, why did I say yes? What's wrong with me? Like, why couldn't I see that this was going to happen? And I would just be curious kind of in your own story and your work with others, how often that is the case with people, that it's something actually really good that's drawing them to a certain environment or a certain relationship.
Oh, that's so good. I'm thinking of a couple of different things. Hillary McBride and Allison Cook, Hillary's new book, Holy Hurt, which is so good. And she has conversations with all these other people, among them Allison Cook, who says, I think, that all abuse is spiritual abuse.
Yes.
And I thought, oh my gosh, because we are spiritual beings. And so when we are abused or violated, it has spiritual undertones no matter what kind.
Right.
And so whether you are identifying physical abuse, verbal abuse, emotional abuse, financial abuse, like any of these things, if they happen within a spiritual context, guess what? It is also spiritual abuse. So I think I'm giving people permission and language to say, oh, actually what I've experienced is also spiritual abuse, without having to take on the stigma or the shame of, oh my gosh, I've been abused. Like I'm a victim. Like, what is this?
Yeah.
Right. So
Yes.
there's also all that shame that we're talking about. And so Allison Cook, again, one of my most helpful conversations was with her when she gave me the permission to take all that shame that I was carrying, specifically around why did I stay so long when I knew I needed to get out?
Yeah.
Right. And I think people often feel that, where they're like, was I complicit? Was I just like Stockholm syndrome? Was it something else? And what it was is I felt such pressure and I felt trapped, like I had no options, right? Because when you're abused, so often your agency is stripped from you.
That's right.
And she reframed it in a way that says, but of course you stayed. You had to provide for your family. You were the only income. You were the only way that they were going to have insurance. Of course you stayed. And I just thought, oh my God, like if I would have allowed myself that shift to be like, oh, I'm making a choice to say, even though this is horrible, even though I'm having blackout panic attacks, even though like I'm suffering all of these things mentally and physically, it's like I'm choosing to stay because I have to provide for my family right now. And I can look for a way out at the same time. But instead of feeling trapped in that decision, like I didn't have any other way out, would have been a completely different mindset than making that choice. And so much of the shame that comes with spiritual abuse or abuse in general, I think, is like owning way too much of the fault.
Absolutely.
When abuse, like if you were abused, it wasn't your fault. Someone did that to you. And you wanted something good, right? And our friend Adam Young talks so much about desire, right?
Yep.
Are you able to go back and bless that desire? It's like I wanted to find healing. I wanted to find rest. Of course, I wanted to find those things. It is unfortunate and horrible that the opposite was found in that place, but that doesn't negate your desire for the healing and for the blessing and the good things that were promised to you.
Absolutely. Well, and I think it's also like, so many spiritually abusive environments or cultures weaponize shame and fear in a way that you actually believe you'll lose God too, or you'll lose calling. You'll lose something of this, belonging and belovedness with God. And I could look back on my story, and I've said this before in some different contexts, but my formative years of spiritual formation were, even though they were kind of in these larger waters of like white evangelical Southern Baptist, and that's not an indictment on like all white evangelicals or all Southern Baptist context, but just even though that was the waters I was in, I actually had like a very liberating, I would say mostly secure, healthy attachment with God. I had some developmental trauma going on in the background. So in many ways, like God was probably my most secure place. But when I entered my adolescent years, that's when we were a part of a faith community that got in like increasingly fundamentalist, really just, so toxic, like rigid binaries out the wazoo, purity culture in all of its forms out the wazoo. And it's like, it was such a pivotal time that even though I had this very secure base, the distortion, the manipulation, the fear, the shame, the like ways in which the walls like closed in and had massive capacity to like bring confusion and make me feel as though like one wrong step and God is done with me. And it's like, I have so much compassion for that young girl who like really opted into like things, at the time as someone called to pastor, which I would have never even said out loud because, I'm taking all these spiritual gifts inventory tests and it's all coming out like, oh, you're a preacher, and it would be like, no, it's your administrative or like you're this, and I'm like, you're right, because I don't want to be an abomination. Why I would have been compelled to have an infatuation with one of my youth leaders, why I would have been set up to be drawn to like a narcissistic structure to cover my strengths so that something could be bigger than me so that I could actually like have this calling and like live this life that I know I'm meant to live. It's like I have so much compassion for her, but that took a lot of work because
Oh
there was
gosh, yeah.
something in me that was like, I can't believe you ever like agreed to these realities, but I can be like, I wanted to keep God. Like I wanted to keep this very like sacred attachment. And I just, yeah, there's something that makes me really furious. And I think Jesus actually, his most furious words are reserved for like people in religious authority, fused with a kind of empirical power, who are like oppressing vulnerable people and heaping heavy burdens on burdened people. Or, his language of like, if you cause these little ones to stumble. And yeah, I just like, as someone called to places of sometimes spiritual authority, I take that so seriously. Like so seriously. But I think you're absolutely right that invitation to compassion towards the parts of ourselves that we actually feel a lot of shame around or feel like there's something so broken about us. And it's part of why I love what you called your nonprofit, Broken to Beloved. It's such a beautiful story in like a very poetic phrase, Broken to
Hmm.
Beloved. And I would love to hear more from you. Um, like, I mean, you've put some words to it, right? Like kind of implied about your own journey from like understanding yourself as broken to beloved. But just tell me more about what you've seen in that shift, in that transformation. What is some of the healing work that people need to encounter or be invited to be able to, yeah, have a new kind of sense of self in
Yeah.
relationship to God and others and with
Yeah.
ourselves?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the name Broken to Beloved, again, comes out of my personal experience that I viewed myself for years as broken, that I introduced myself in places as damaged goods. And it was all the years of work in counseling and just doing the reading and learning and to untangle myself from that identity. That brokenness is something that happened to me. It's not who I am. That at the core, I am still beloved. And that was really hard to accept as someone who is a recovering perfectionist and has to do things the right way. And if I mess up, then I have to throw the whole thing out because all of it is bad, right? Not just this one
Right,
mistake, but the whole thing. So, like,
right.
reclaiming that sense of belovedness was a big deal for me. And I think when you talk about those pieces of shame and when you talk about having compassion for that little Rachel who grew up thinking, I'm called to be a preacher, but no, you're not, because you're not allowed to be in this context, right? It's, and we all have these desires and dreams that we have, and we're taught to shame them. And we're given these strict binaries and we're given all of these things when really it's like, no, at the end of the day, you are and always will be God's beloved. And it's why one of the values that we worked so hard to articulate was this idea of goodness over wickedness, that I want to hold to a Genesis 1-2 theology of humanity versus a Genesis 3 theology. That yes, we can be wicked and depraved and sinful and all of these things. And that was not our original intent.
That's right.
That is not how we were originally created. God created man and said, very good.
That's right.
And so what does it look like to reclaim that sense of two things can be true at the same time, but it doesn't mean that we take this default position of wickedness and depravity and sin and all of this stuff. And so moving out of that towards that belovedness, I think it's when we wrap ourselves up or wrap our identities up in any of the other things outside of our belovedness is where we get tripped up.
Mhm.
That's where the shame comes in real hard. Because if my identity is in my position as a pastor or as a Sunday school teacher or as a mentor or as a whatever I do for my work or as a mom or as a, whatever that is, anytime our identity gets wrapped up in anything other than our belovedness, we set ourselves up. Right. And so, because what if that thing is taken away from me? Or what if I do make that mistake or whatever it is that happens, right? That inevitably will happen. So what does it look like to move from that brokenness to belovedness? And so the name, honestly, came out of a cohort that we launched. And I launched the cohort first. And then Broken to Beloved was kind of born out of it. But it's this idea that we walk people through this process of how do you learn to own your own story? And I know Allender Center obviously is all about story work, but it's so often when we've experienced abuse or when we carry trauma in our bodies, it's the sense of someone else told my story for me and they stole it from me.
Yeah.
So how do I reclaim my story and I get to tell it now instead of the pastor standing up on the stage with his hand on my back, usually with a knife attached, to say, oh, can we thank Brother Brian for all of his years of service? And can we just be so appreciative and all these things? Like, you're the one who pushed me out, dude. What's going on? And it's such a crazy making thing that happens so often in churches all across America / the world. But your story gets told for you and God is calling him in a new direction. It's like, no, he's not. I don't have a job. You're just, the direction is just not here. And so all these lies get told about us for us. And then and we don't want anyone to talk to, don't reach out because he just needs space. It's like, no, you're telling them to isolate me.
Don't want anyone to know the truth.
So what does it look like to reclaim and tell your own story? Knowing that it will be believed by a safe and compassionate community, right? And once you're able to do that, how do we equip you with language and words to define what happened to you? Like spiritual abuse, like what is trauma? What are the effects of trauma? What is gaslighting, narcissism, deconstruction, spiritual bypassing? All of these terms that people are like, oh my gosh, I had no idea. Yeah. Like even just defining agency for some people who are like, I don't know what that means. I hear it. And then moving from there into this liminal space and recognizing, hey, you feel really untethered right now and that's normal and that's okay. And it's actually good.
Yeah.
And there's a lot to figure out here in this space. And while you're here, just take a deep breath because re-engaging with your own body is going to give you a sense of groundedness that you haven't had before. And it's the one autonomic response that you can actually control anyway. And it reminds your body, hey, when everything feels out of control, I am in a little bit of control because I can speed up my breath. I can slow it down. I can hold it. I can do whatever I need to right now. And so I'm here right now. And moving through that practice of breath and mindfulness, we start to go really nerdy and deep into polyvagal theory and autonomic nervous system responses and what happens when you're triggered and activated so that you can become aware of, oh, I'm being pulled back into a trauma response right now. And so what can I do in this moment? And so kind of the framework that I use is to notice what's happening, give it a name. And then once you have a name for it, you get to choose how do we want to navigate. So it's like, now that I know what I'm dealing with, what do I want to do with it? Mm-hmm. Maybe I need to stay because I'm the only source of income and insurance.
That's right.
Maybe I want to look for a way out. Maybe this community is not great for me and I'm looking for something else. Maybe this is my spouse or my child and I don't have the option to sever that tie right now. So how do I want to choose, as Alison Cook says again, to suffer wisely?
That's right.
At least I do it with an awareness of what's happening instead of just taking it, right? So it's offering people a chance to recover their sense of agency, to not prescribe things to them and say, hey, this is what you have to do or what you should do. I really try to resist telling people what they should do. I'll frame it in hey, this is what has been helpful to me. If it's helpful for you, I would love to hear that. And if not, I would love to hear how you handle it, right? But story work, definitions, language for where you are, like understanding how your nervous system is responding to things so that you can notice, name, and navigate your way through it to move towards recognizing and reclaiming ultimately your sense of belovedness, that this is your birthright. If nothing else, this is your calling, that you are beloved. And so live out of an overflow of that belovedness instead of constantly grasping for it somewhere else.
I love that progression, and a few things I just want to call out. Like one, like I love how you take the body seriously, because I think a
Yeah,
lot
we
of
have
people, they
to.
hear a language like spiritual abuse, and
Hmm.
spirituality in general, we have this very platonic, enlightenment, like, oh,
Hmm.
it's this kind of ethereal part of us that exists outside of our bodies. It's
Hmm.
emotions, or it's as if those aren't like deeply connected to our brain and our nervous system. But yeah, when we're talking about abuse, we're talking about the ways in which our body has been traumatized. And in spiritually abusive environments, so much I think it's Peter Levine, or it's Gabor Mate in an intro to Peter Levine, quoting Peter Levine to himself. But it's this phrase, trauma is not what happens to us, it's what's kind of like left behind in the absence of an
Hmm.
empathetic witness. And there's something about being in a spiritually abusive environment, exactly what you're saying. Like, we don't have the luxury of anyone helping us make meaning of what's happening. And if anything, they are telling us the meaning of what's happening in a way that invites us to bear the shame. You put that so well. That has huge implications for the body. Like, shame impacts the body, terror impacts the body, powerlessness impacts the body. And so I just love that you're, you know, giving people tools and resources to understand this is not just like one part of you. This is a very holistic healing journey. The other piece is that sense of agency. And I don't know if you've experienced this, but I experience this a lot of people I work with. It's like, it's both the thing that, at some point in the work, they would say, I'm so grateful for like the ways in which you authorized my personhood, or but in the midst of it, sometimes they're like, but I'm actually pretty formed and trained to like look towards authoritative figures. And can you just tell me like what the steps are? Just tell me what to do. And it's like such a as like a 2 on the Enneagram with a 1 wing. I have like both, like the I'm a helper, but also I've got to do it right and be good. It's fine. I'm fine. I will just be in therapy forever, but I'm fine. I'm totally fine. It's like, oh, I want to be helpful to people, and to kind of to know that mysterious place of what it is to say. It's like why my therapist for like 5 years was like, "What do you need today?" And I was like, "You shut your mouth. I don't know. Like, I just want you to tell me what I need." And she's
Yeah,
like, "This is our work. Like
this is
you
it.
get to embody what you need." And it genuinely took a long time. I could be like, I know what you need. I know what the bus driver needs. I know what everyone needs. But if you ask me that, I just kind of go blank. It's like, obviously she would be like, you're wearing sweatpants. And this was before COVID, where like wearing sweatpants meant something, it like meant something. She'd be like, you're wearing sweatpants. It feels like you're giving lots of nonverbal cues that you're not okay. Would you say that's true? And I would be like, how dare you judge me? But also, I'm not okay. Now it wouldn't mean anything. It would just be like, oh, you left your house. Great.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
yeah. So that sense of agency and personhood is so powerful. And yet, when you're a survivor of abuse, especially spiritual abuse, it is some of the hardest, like, to recover and trust yourself that like you could make a decision without some kind of authoritative figure basically telling you what to do. Yeah, like I'm just so grateful for that language. But I would be curious, like, what have you noticed in people, like even for yourself, in that part of the healing
Yeah,
process?
yeah, that's a great question. You talked about the absence of an empathetic witness. And so much of what I've read in the process of moving towards healing and wholeness, which is what we say all the time, that's kind of the language that we use, is how important community and connection are. Because trauma is profoundly disconnecting and disintegrating, right? And the problem is, so often in communities where we've been abused, we're also made to feel isolated.
That's right.
You are alone.
That's
No
absolutely
one
right.
is behind you. No one is with you. If you say a word, we will cut everything off. And so it's either threatened or it's actually done. So what I hear so often from our community is like, I feel so utterly alone. How in the world am I supposed to move towards community when that's the thing that harmed me and I'm just too scared? And I have so much compassion for that person because I was there so many times. And what I've slowly been learning, maybe over the last year-ish, and I've sort of been getting, and isn't this funny? I've been getting permission from other people and other experts to say this out loud, is like the first person that you need to connect to is actually yourself.
Mm-hmm.
If there is no empathetic witness around, guess what? You can choose to believe yourself
Mm-hmm.
because you've been primed and trained not to. So what would happen if you went back to that story of harm and the way you've been gaslighting yourself to say, no, that didn't actually happen. No, they didn't mean it that way. To say, actually, I think they did. I think they actually wanted to hurt me in this instance. Or maybe it was unintentional, but you've passed it off and you've dismissed it. It's like, and you're like, no, that wasn't really that hurtful. It's actually, no, that profoundly and deeply cut me
Mm-hmm.
in a way because I thought this person was my friend. And then I didn't respond to one message and they've never talked to me again. And so what I thought was a true and deep friendship ended up being nothing. And so what do I do with that? How do I sit with that? Right? So believing yourself, being that empathetic witness for yourself, being community for yourself, which sounds wacky, but it's like we talk about parts work, right? And internal family systems. I mean, hello.
I'm like, this audience would be like, oh yeah, we're in.
We're all over it. It's like all of these exiled parts of yourselves,
That's
all
right.
of these managers and firefighters and things that are competing for your attention, you get to integrate them and you get to pay attention to say, guess what? I hear you. I know you've been yelling for the last 5 or 7 years
Yeah,
about this thing that I've been trying to ignore because it was too painful to face.
that's right. Or
And
too
you know
scary.
what? I think, absolutely too scary. And then you say, you know what? I think it's time because this is not how I want to keep living. And I don't know where else to turn. And I don't have a community right now, but I've got this voice in the back of my mind that keeps yelling to pay attention. And I do want to figure out how to pay attention. And so how do you reconnect to yourself? And you talked about that sacred attachment with God, like bringing all these other attachment issues with you. It's like sometimes there are reasons that we feel like we cannot attach to God.
That's right.
Because his name was used as a weapon.
That's right.
Because his name was used to demean or dismiss or belittle or whatever us, right? So it's like, so it makes sense. So don't go and heap more shame on yourself. It's like, why can't I
No.
feel connected to God? Why can't I pray right now? Why can't I read my
Exactly.
Bible?
Or the rituals that were connected there that, again, you might need to set down for a season. That doesn't mean that you may never get to enjoy them again. You might not. Like, they might need to become something new. But it's, that sense of like, it's almost like, I've worked with so many people that still feel like, well, this is how I get back to God. And then there's just so much torment and like kind of that, like, heaping on of more shame. Like, it must be me. I don't have enough faith. I haven't, I'm still holding on to something and to me, that's just, I have so much heartache there, so much compassion, so much ferocity of like, oh, you don't have to torture yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I just had a coaching client this morning who has this eternal struggle with this need to serve God the right way and do the right thing, because if not, I'm wicked. And if I'm wicked, then God can have nothing to do with me because he's God. And if I'm wicked, that means he's wicked. So he has to distance himself from me. And I was like, well, hold on, listen to yourself. Are you that powerful that you're going to change God because of your wickedness? And is that even really what you believe about God? And the answer was no. I said, like, how would you describe God? And the answer was like, good, light, love. I said, that's not what it sounds like when you talk about him to me. And so it was the whole idea of like, if I put myself on a scale of like, and we got to the bottom of it just saying like, if you don't feel safe, there's no way you're going to feel loved. So do you even feel safe with God? And the answer was no. It's like, and it makes sense why you don't, because look at what you've been taught about him. Look at what you've been told about what God thinks of you. Of course you don't feel safe. So what would it look like to move 2 steps towards feeling safe? Like not 0 to 100, just from 2 to 4. And so what would that look like? And we ended up just rewriting the whole script of what God thinks about me is not that I'm horrible and wicked and terrible, but that he is my protector and that he is not out to get me. He's actually for me.
Mm-hmm.
And so moving towards that belovedness rather than all these shame spiral things that we do to ourselves, it makes sense why we beat ourselves up. It makes sense
Mm-hmm.
why we don't feel like we can move towards or away from. And it makes sense. So the sooner we can, again, notice and name that, then we can choose what we want to do with it.
Yeah. It's so interesting because two things come to mind. One, and early in my healing, which was more just like my entrance into therapy, like, I came to the Seattle School to do an MDiv because I wanted to help people and I wanted to get more tools for helping people. And like very quickly into my journey was like, yeah, I mean, I laugh because if you had told me 30 years ago, you're going to work in trauma, I would be like, what? And if they were like, and because you're a survivor of trauma, I would have been like, what? It's just
No
when the
thanks.
thing's your thing,
Mhm.
it's your normal. And I feel like that's actually true for any person I've ever talked to or worked with who is a survivor. It's like, if it's your thing, you're going to, it's going to feel like, well, it's not as bad as, so I can't really take it seriously. And I think Chuck DeGroat wrote this on Facebook, or he was posting to someone else, but just that sense of like, your nervous system is your nervous system. Like, it's not comparing itself to other people's nervous system. And I just really like that. But early in my healing journey, one of my therapists said, Rachel, do you believe God loves you as much as God loves God's mission for you? And
Ooh.
I mean, I would love to say in that moment, I was like, yes. But honestly, the question was so disorienting to me.
Mhm.
It was like something I had actually never considered up to that point. And it did lead to, like, in biblical studies language, like that hermeneutical shift that I love what you're saying. It wasn't like a 180 or a three.
Mhm.
It was like 1 inch of a shift that changed everything. Right. And another thing that comes to mind is like when I was in the like most horrible parts of, like, I would say some of the most profound spiritual abuse I experienced when I was kind of 3 years into this relationship with my youth leader that I didn't actually at all want to be in at that point. But because the language was, this is what God wants, I really was like, I can't lose God. But I had this moment in my dorm room as a freshman. Everyone's playing. I don't have friends because I'm very isolated by virtue of the abuse. It's the whole point. I'd had a few professors kind of start giving me language for like, I'm concerned about you. Here's some things, red flags, in your relationship. And I'm like, okay. I'm like kind of pulling the resources. But I had this moment of like, I want to die. Like, if this is my future, I don't want to live. And it was like I think God made part of me. At the time, it felt rebellious, but some part of me, that agency, that some little shred of agency in me was like, if you want me to die and you want me to be miserable, I actually think I would be better with like my own devices. Like, I actually think I got to lose you because I think I would be better without you. Like, at least I'd want to live. And again, for me, that was a very important deconstruction moment of a certain image of God I had been given. And my story, again, is very different than everyone's because I did have something of that early secure. It was almost like in that moment, it opened the door for all my rage and anger and like those parts of me that are just like, what the actual hell?
Yeah.
Like, what? Like, almost like the fever dream, of just like,
Yeah.
even if I don't have any allies, like, I will find a way. And it wasn't like the next day or the next minute, but it actually did open the door for me to have access to these parts of God that had just been totally eclipsed by whoever this God was that like was being given to me. And there was a lot of grace in that for me. And I'm not at all saying that that's everyone's experience. I'm so grateful that it was mine, that like I got to kind of enter this womb-like season of healing. And I guess I would just love to hear from you and your wisdom. It does feel like in healing from spiritual abuse and recovering agency that there are things or images of God that have to be deconstructed. And deconstruction is such a term that's thrown around and it's like scary to a lot of us because like there are a lot of folks in the deconstruction world who have moved to, I think, a kind of new fundamentalism that's like anti-God, anti-religion, anti-scripture, like a lot of defensive mechanisms. I have so much mercy for that. I'm not saying they need to choose something different. Well, maybe I am saying there are other options. I don't think it means you have to choose those options, but I don't think it has to be the only option. But there still has to be some sense of, I'm leaving you behind. I'm leaving this thing, and maybe, I don't know. I would love to hear from you, your experience of that in your own journey and your work with people. How would you talk about deconstruction and reconstruction?
I would want somehow, again, to be invitational and to strip the word deconstruction of all the stigma that's been placed on it over the past several years, and to say that deconstruction is a good and necessary process that all of us go through in our lives, because no one ends their life being the same person they were when they were 20. You went through deconstruction. Guess what? And I think it was a conversation I had with Camden Morganti, maybe. And it was this idea, like, there are different levels of deconstruction. Like, when you think about your house, when you get one or move into one or whatever it is, sometimes it's like a remodel. Sometimes it's not even that. It's like a refurbish. I'm going to refurbish my cabinets, or I'm going to remodel the kitchen, or I'm going to renovate the living room. And so, like, there's all these different levels. It's like, but then you like start to tear the walls out. It's like, oh my gosh, look at this giant mold on the wall.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, this renovation has turned into something else. And so, but it starts with the process of just like, is this really how I want things to be? As I look at my life, as I look at my spirituality, as I look at my relationship with myself, with God, with others, is this really what I want? Does this feel right and good and true? And if not, guess what, buddy? Deconstruction's coming for you. And so it's what are the ideas that are holding me back? And this is not like a go and sin however you want to, because that's how so many people frame deconstruction, is that they just want to go do their own thing.
Right.
And Scott McKnight and Tommy Phillips do such a great job of saying, is it Invisible Jesus, I think is their book, is like, people aren't leaving the church because they want to go sin. It's because they stop seeing the Jesus that you talked about there. And they're going to look for him. And so those who are deconstruction are most often the people who are trying to hold on to their faith, not to leave it. And then, like you said, the people who are embracing a different kind of fundamentalism are, I think, it's going to sound judgy, because I guess it kind of is, are the ones who haven't really done their work. They've just taken their fundamentalism and moved to a different arena. And so I talked about our values earlier. One of our other values is this idea of curiosity over certainty.
Mm-hmm.
And what I want us to do is to be able to ask really good questions of ourselves and of each other without needing to hold on to a position so tightly. Because again, if I'm holding on to a position that tightly, is it because part of my identity is wrapped up in it? And if I let that go, this idea about my politics, or about sexuality, or about abortion, or about gun rights, or about immigrants, or about whatever the issue is it because somehow my identity is wrapped up in that a little bit? Or am I willing to be curious about where that idea came from in the first place, so that I can remodel it and get something that's better and more functional and serves me today in a way that it didn't 10 years ago? Right? So and there are so many great books about asking questions, like Aaron Moon, I've Got Questions, Liz Charlotte Grant, Knock at the Sky, Pete Enns, How the Bible Actually Works. Like, there's all these books about learning how to ask good questions and to sit with the tension of, I might not have an answer for this for a really long time or ever. And you know what? That would be okay, because if you need certainty, that's not faith.
Yeah. Absolutely. One of my best professors actually gave us this whole thing about how, like, our faith exists in tension, and you have to imagine it like that. And any attempt to, like, swing fully in certainty to one side of the tension or the other, and the whole thing collapses. And that's not to say there isn't clarity of a way through. And I think as we come to a close here, I do want people to hear different ways they can connect with your work and the work of Broken to Beloved. So we'll talk about that as we close. But one of the things I love about belovedness being a core part of the recovery process and the healing process from spiritual abuse is that it we're back to like how you talked about Genesis 1 and 2. It actually connects to the truer story, because if you reclaim a sense of being beloved, then you inherently start to see the belovedness of all people and understand that this story we're a part of is not just to be redeemed from our brokenness and our sin, but to be a part of co-creating with the Spirit, like the restoration of all things. Like back, because, the end of the story, at least the way I see it and a lot of people see it, is not we go off to some planet on a rocket ship, and scorch this place. It's that God comes to restore and to dwell with us in fullness, in new creation. And I just think, like the where we're moving in our healing is not just, so I can just be healed and feel good and feel better. It's restoring also, like you said, our capacity to be in community and to imagine possibilities beyond just becoming good or becoming right or becoming like good enough to fit into this thing, but actually like the restoration of all things. And I will say for myself, when I'm outside of a sense of being beloved, that invitation feels virtually impossible.
Oh, yeah.
Because I'm like, I'm damaged goods. Like, I'm not quite sure I can really help you with that. Like, good luck, So I can very much relate to that. Any final words before we just share a little bit more with people about ways they can connect with you and Broken to Beloved?
Well, I love what you're saying about owning your own belovedness enables you to extend that to other people. And that's the whole thing, because what we talk about so often is this idea of grace, compassion, and empathy, except it has to be extended to you first. Like, if I don't know how to receive grace, I sure can't give it. If I don't know how to feel empathy on behalf of myself, how am I really going to truly be empathetic towards someone else? And then same with compassion. If I can't move towards action on behalf of me, it's not really true compassion on behalf of someone else.
Yeah.
And when I do receive those things, when I do reclaim and recognize my own belovedness, then again, like you're saying, like you see it, you can't not see it in other people. And you can't not see the injustices that are happening to other people or on behalf of other people or because of other people. And then going back to that sense of agency thing, if and when I'm able to reclaim my sense of agency and to speak up on my own behalf, then it empowers me to speak up on someone else's behalf and to say, hold on, that's not right. You can't do that. That's wrong. Like, it makes sense, again, why we see what we see and why we don't do what we don't do. And it's not enough.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we move towards our belovedness? How do we snap that cycle of shame that we keep spiraling through to own what we can, not as shameful, horrible parts? They've been trying to help us all along and they've been yelling for our attention. But how do we learn to pay attention to those things, give them a name so we can navigate our way through it in a different way than our habitual patterns, right? And to break out of it, like you're saying, to find that true story of you are beloved and God has so much more for it than just you in our hyper individualized culture,
right,
to say it's about all of us.
It's good to talk with you.
I've loved this, Rachel. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, if you, are feeling really drawn to this conversation, and as you should be, Brian, tell us a little bit more about some of the work of Broken to Beloved and ways people can connect.
Sure. I am on Instagram at Broken to Beloved, but I'm on a social media break for the summer. So if you show up before September, you're probably not going to see much. I'll be back in September. I don't know how often, but it's been a fun experiment. You can absolutely find us at our website, brokentobeloved.org. You'll find all of our programs. The cohort that I talked about is on a wait list right now. We usually open twice a year in October and February. We have our upcoming gathering, which Rachel will be at, very excited, in October. So you can sign up to get tickets for that. We've got a book club community that meets online. We get to speak to Adam Young next week about his book, and we're reading a book every 2 months is a lot of fun. We've got all kinds of things, and you can find them all at that website. You can sign up for our monthly newsletter to kind of keep up with what's going on. And if you feel so led, we are always looking for supporters and donations. So if you want to head to just the website, you can take care of it there, and we would be so appreciative.
Well, thank you. I am just really grateful for you, grateful for the work of Broken to Beloved, and look forward to getting to partner with you in the season ahead.
Same. Thanks so much, Rachel.
Thank you again for joining us. We hope that the conversations we share with you here on the Allender Center podcast have touched your heart and sparked a sense of hope within you. Our work at the Allender Center is fueled by the support of people like you. As a nonprofit organization housed within the Seattle School of Theology and Psychology, our mission is to boldly engage the impact of trauma and abuse on the human heart and to provide hope and healing to individuals, families, and communities. Your contributions directly contribute to making this vision a reality. If you feel moved to join us in this work, we invite you to consider making a one-time or monthly gift. Your donation, no matter the size, plays a significant role in bringing the hope of redemption and healing to so many. To give, simply visit theallendercenter.org/give. Once again, we extend our heartfelt gratitude for your support. Together, we can continue to bring hope and healing to those who need it. Thank you.
The Allender Center podcast is produced by the Seattle School of Theology and Psychology.
If you'd like more information about the Allender Center, you can look at theallendercenter.org.